reading the paper, seeing the news, something that's kind of near and dear to my heart because it doesn't make sense to me. I see these layoffs that are occurring, and they've been occurring. It's nothing new. It's kind of the way of life, but they just do not work. I know I'm a bit of an old man screaming at a cloud on this, so there's my warning for this video. I'm going to be screaming at the clouds. I'm not sure if I'm screaming into the void or if there's something we can really do about this. I entered the workforce in the late 80s. As I was entering the workforce, my father was retiring. My father worked for the same company for about 37 years. He actually left a little bit early, probably because the climate was changing overall to something analogous to what we see today. But he left the workforce and I joined it. Now, I worked for one company out of school for a couple of years. Then I went to work for, oddly enough, Unilever, which was the same company he had worked for 37 years. He started there. He got his degree while he was working there, raised a family, and then he retired from Unilever. So I started working there. Loved the company. I don't think I got in specifically because of my father. I think I knew a lot about the company. So not only did I technically have the skills for the IT job that they were hiring me for, I knew a lot about the Unilever business that I was going to be working for. I had worked there for a year or two and I was starting to get into management. I got my first taste for a layoff. They did ask me for a small percentage of my team, and that was rough. But what was really rough, and my team was young because I was young and it was kind of new technology that we were just hiring into. What was really rough was seeing people in their mid 40s who had worked for the company for their whole career getting laid off, where they were ill equipped and they were shell shocked. So that was my first exposure, and it was pretty shocking. So if we just roll the clock back to 2001, it's about 25 years, 24, 25 years ago, right after 9/11, the travel industry was really upended. Layoffs ripped through, especially the airlines, without a doubt. So over 81,000 jobs were lost, were cut, were laid off in the industry by the time September ended in 2001. So 9/11 occurred mid-month, and by the end of the month, over 81,000 jobs were laid off. US Airways and United cut 15 to 23% of their workforce. That's a pretty big number. There was an exception that I'd like to shine a light on: Southwest Airlines. They delayed purchasing new airplanes, not anything that was a safety issue, certainly, not anything that was really a competitive edge for them. They prioritized, but they delayed purchasing new airplanes, and they canceled some corporate upgrades like offices and systems and things like that. Again, not safety related, but just expense related. And the reason they did it is because the guy at the helm, the CEO and the co-founder of the company, Herb Kelleher, his philosophy was nothing kills your company's culture like layoffs. I happen to agree with that. So in 2023, more than 1,000 tech companies, only tech companies, laid off over 250,000 people. The federal government laid off 110,000 jobs. This year, BP, BlackRock, IBM, Meta, Starbucks, Workday, and a bunch of other companies have all announced the layoffs. Kelleher unfortunately passed away in 2019. So now even Southwest Airlines has announced layoffs. Kelleher was right though. And there was a time when management all thought like Kelleher, or mostly thought like Kelleher. So what the heck happened? So in the mid 1900s, the US was firing on all cylinders, coming off of World War II. And it was definitely an era of unprecedented prosperity and growth, without a doubt. Companies balanced profits with employee welfare. along with the public good. There was no written contract that they'd have to employ somebody for their life, but it was kind of taken. They had benefit plans for them. They had pensions for them, and they didn't do mass layoffs, or they didn't do them to any scale. So there are always going to be different business reasons where a layoff is the only way out of it. That's the way it was back then. And certainly seasonal employees, that was really on a schedule. So it was not uncommon to be like my dad, where many workers just were with the company for their entire life. IBM used to be considered cradle to grave. Good or bad, people used to have job security in there. So what happened was the 1980s, and a lot of movies were made about these things. So the shift came to stockholder and stock prices at all costs. The other stakeholders went out the window. The the public good, the welfare of the employees, not a consideration. Only profits and stock prices, focused on the stock owner. Who led the charge on this? Neutron, Jack Welch, and Chainsaw Al Dunlap. They led the charge in this management style, and they focused on reducing costs, and they focused on just really the short-term profits. Now, I can hear my MBA friends, I don't know about you, and maybe some MBAs listening to me here, that worshiped at the altar of Jack Welch. I do not. Jack Welch and his kind really led the charge on the change of culture. I guess it was inevitable, but Jack himself laid off over 100,000 GE employees. Now, if you go to buy a GE dishwasher or washing machine today, congratulations, you just bought a Chinese dishwasher or washing machine. GE, in the sense of the appliances, is not an American company. That's what Jack Welch did to it. These guys also introduced top grading, where you lay off the bottom 10% of the company every year. And the theory there is, well, great, then we only have the top 9%. The problem with that is it drives people to the middle. It also makes managers lazy. Managers and company management should be thinking about, what's my competitive focus? What's my strategy for the company? How do I get my organization focused on this and capable of delivering? Not just kicking out the bottom 10%. And people change year to year. Your bottom 10% may not be your bottom 10% next year. So before the 1980s, 5% of the Fortune 100 companies had those mass layoffs, just 5%. By the time 1994 rolled around, and that's about when I experienced my first layoff. I wasn't laid off, but I was part of the management team that was unfortunately delivering this. 45% of the Fortune 100 companies had those mass layoffs. 45%. That's an incredible number. So unfortunately, there is an ethos that remains today, and we're just going to see year after year about 80 million people getting laid off in the United States. It just works out that way. During a recession, that number is going to go up. In 2008 to 2011, and I remember this time well, 65% of the companies had layoffs. 2008, the reason why that year is important is that that's when the housing bubble burst. And during that time, there was a recession, and over 65% of the companies laid people off. So we're seeing studies show that after a layoff, 20% of the employees decline in job performance. I witnessed that, and I could talk to that anecdotally. There's also a loss in networking. And I don't mean IT networking, like how does the internet work? I mean business networking. People who know people, who interface with other people, who know how to get things done. Those people are gone or will go. Training is gone. All that training that you've done, and you should be focused on it. And the knowledge, that institutional knowledge. Now, I think that every company needs a good blend of a healthy, solid institutional knowledge, what your business is for, what's the positives of your business, how does it work, how do we get it to work, with some new blood and new ideas. You lose that during a layoff. You also get an increase in voluntary turnover. Now, I, for one, when I was a little bit earlier in my career, I used to go out on a few interviews a year, like 2 or 3 interviews, and I would go to get a job offer. As soon as I got the job offer, if I liked the company I was working for, and I did this when I was working at Unilever, and the layoff is probably what spurred me into doing it. I'd get a job offer, I'd say no thanks. I still do that to a lesser degree, but I have left companies because I didn't trust them anymore. And you break that trust as soon as you have a mass layoff. You break that trust when you have a mass layoff as part of your business process, which many companies do. You also are increasing your overtime cost. You're decreasing your quality. When you decrease your quality, you're increasing the price of your product, and you're decreasing your customer base, and you're going to decrease your revenue. And you also decrease your production. These numbers typically don't go away. So how do the companies perform that go through layoffs? And this is kind of interesting. Bain is a company that works with corporations on their strategy. And a big part of the business either drives companies to these layoffs or is a strategy on how to lay off people. So it's interesting that this is their data. So companies that do not lay off employees, meaning they have a challenge and they find another way. They understand their business, they understand their organization, and instead of having a mass layoff, they find another way to make it work. They typically will have an increase of 9% in the next year. So they looked at things strategically, they understood it, and they found another way other than just letting people go. And these mass layoffs aren't strategic. They're typically, give me 10%. Also, 38% of companies that lay off employees see stock prices decrease more than 10%. Now, I believe that most layoffs start in the boardroom. There are either executives or board members that are demanding this cut in workforce, this reduction in workforce to drive down costs. And the reason why you want to drive down the costs is to increase your stock price. So 38% are seeing it drop by 10% or more. That's a big failure. That is bad management. That is, I don't know what I'm doing. So here's a couple of use cases that I find very interesting. TIAA, you may or may not know, is a financial company. They could be called fintech. They do a lot of IT development. They're focused on retirement. They're focused on retirement plans and funds and annuities and things of that nature. So one of their key differentiators is record keeping. They used to be a .org, and they really focus on education, or they used to, education like colleges, universities, and healthcare, big hospitals. And their differentiator was they would keep records on all the retirement people. Well, after their layoff, and they do layoffs almost every year, it's just part of their business process. They get themselves in a position they need to cut costs, they lay people off, and they think that's the answer. So they took this record keeping, which is their only real key differentiator at this point, other than they do have a lot of customers, a lot of money. Their returns aren't that great, but they have this record keeping administrative function. They outsourced it to Accenture. Now Accenture heavily uses H-1B employees, which are 75% from India. I would assume that Accenture's H-1B population is almost all from India. So they outsourced their main competitive advantage to a company that really isn't even American. And then what they did was they allowed Accenture to go and hire the people with the expertise that they just laid off. So if I'm making $100,000 a year for TIA, I get laid off. I go to Accenture. Maybe they pay me $100,000, maybe they pay me $80,000, but they're going to have to get the money from TIA. So TIA is paying it anyway at the end of the day, and they probably have an unhappy Accenture employee that's a former TIA employee. I don't know if they have a different way to work math than I do. So They outsourced this key differentiator, all this knowledge, to a predominantly Indian company. And they also took their other consulting companies and they gave those positions to Accenture as well. So they put all their eggs in the Accenture basket that is outsourcing, is offshoring, and to India, and has a predominantly Indian workforce. On top of that, they're already in this situation. Their returns are not best in breed. They're not the ones you go to for great returns out there in the market. You could look at other investment companies for that. Their outlays, meaning people that are drawing from their company, is greater than their intakes, and it's been that way for a little while. So they not only gave their competitive advantage to Accenture, they gave Accenture a ton of leverage to negotiate whatever they want when the next contract is due. They are losing money. I don't know where they're going to be 10 years from now. It'll be interesting to see. Not a good strategy on their point from my perspective. If you have a different perspective, let me know. IBM's another one. I think they're a great use case. They're an example of more than just themselves. They're also one of these companies that do these continual layoffs. And what they've done is over the years is they've continued to lay off in the United States. They've moved those functions to an Indian workforce. What they've done is they take the people in the United States, they lay them off, and they either give those positions to somebody in India or somebody onshore from India. And they also move those functions to try to have AI do it. So it's interesting. Growing Indian workforce, the company is mostly Indian at this point. It's no longer really a United States company. It is predominantly an Indian company. And they're trying to use AI. So it was once an absolute tech giant. They were the tech giant, and now it's a niche player. They're trying to make their play with AI now. That's where they've been driven to. Not that AI is a small play, but that's what they're doing. And they've really lost their innovative edge. I'm sure if you work for IBM, you're going to disagree with me. But as a consumer of technical products and company services, they're not the go-to people by a wide gap. They're following in the footsteps of Hewlett Packard. Hewlett Packard was this tremendously great engineering powerhouse. I absolutely admire them. They outsourced everything. They, like IBM, they outsourced the manufacturing. They outsourced the people. And they're almost not relevant at this point. And both companies are really heading down that path. So these are two use cases on why these layoffs leave you with bad options. And historically, I don't think they pan out. There are exceptions. Maybe they're the exceptions that make the rule. But they're also newer companies, Spotify and Meta. Although if you're a younger person, you may not think of these companies as new. As an ancient person like myself, these are new companies. So Meta and Spotify have both seen profits and stock price increase consistently since their layoffs. I don't know if their strategy is going to be baked in like TIA and IBM, where they're going to lay off every year, or if this was, and this is what I think it is, you're building your company, you're building your product, and you hire a bunch of people to get it done, then you kind of mature, and then you have a reduction in workforce because you don't need that many people anymore. And I think that's what they did. But it'll be interesting to track these folks as well. So let me ask you if this sounds familiar in your work experience. From the executive team, or from a specific executive sponsor, you get a big initiative, millions of dollars, that's unclear, and the goals are fuzzy. And it's announced that we're going to deliver it over 3 years, let's say. Then people at the director level, and that's me, have to figure out how to deliver on these unclear expectations. So you start to hire. You hire because what you want to do is deliver. You have to deliver something, and you want to look good doing it. So you hire a bunch of hopefully talented people, and you start to deliver. Maybe it's aligned with the executive expectations. Maybe it's not. You don't know because they were unclear. Even if they approve on your plan, you're not sure if you're hitting their their expectations. So once you get to a year or 2 years, they look at the budget and they say, yikes, I've got overruns. So what's the corporate thing to do when you have overruns? You start to lay people off. You lay people off, but people still need to get things done. So you transfer that work to consultants and H-1B resources, and they replace your employees, and you're losing that knowledge outside the company. And maybe you're delivering something that's meaningful, maybe you're not. I've seen $30 million projects be delivered and it's fuzzy. And people aren't really sure if there's any value to it. So why is this happening? It really is a symptom of an unsound business strategy, and the larger problems that the company needs to address just aren't part of it because you didn't define it. So what happens is the executives and senior management focus on their own delivery. They're not sure what everyone's asking for. So the only thing they can be sure of what they deliver, what they do. So they get very me focused. They fight for resources and they deliver, and they're very proud and loud about what they delivered. Is there any value to what they delivered? Maybe, maybe not. You don't know because it's not aligned. So what I'm saying is, without an understanding of the business needs, what's broken in the business, what needs to get fixed and improved in the business in a meaningful way, these businesses just turn to layoffs every time they need to cut costs. So what can work? Cut work hours instead of people. Know your business. Spend time. If you're going to hire a Bain Consulting, spend time with them to understand the business and what are your targets and what should you attack next. That's where your energy should be. Hire based on need. Don't hire based on those silo goals. I don't think a director in a corporation should be able to just hire without having those hires match up directly to a targeted corporate goal. And too often that happens. And understand that people are your competitive edge. And I don't mean that as a slogan. And part of that with the people is you must bake in training and continual learning as part of the culture and job requirements. So if your culture is one about your company, understanding your company's business, understanding the challenges within the company, understanding the goals and driving towards it, and then ensuring that people understand that's hard work, you need to stay up to speed, train, and continue to learn. We'll do some of it from the company's perspective, and our expectation is that you're also doing it on your own. That's a great culture right there. Also, as how Southwest Airlines did, hold off on those non-human expenses. If you're in a budget crisis, put off building out new offices. I've seen companies lay people off and build a new headquarters or a new office. And do not, for the love of all that is holy, do not outsource your competitive edge. I don't know why anyone would ever do that. You need to own your competitive edge. So one more case study, and I like this case study. MSC Industrial Direct. You may never have heard of this company like the other ones I've spoken about. It's an industrial supply company, and it was created in New York City. And then it was based in Long Island. I think they still have some of their corporate headquarters on Long Island, but they really moved down to North Carolina. So their mission statement has been, and I love this mission statement, to be the best industrial distributor in North America as measured by our customers, our associates, and our owners. They use the word associates, which is the same as other people use employees, but by their customers, associates, and owners being stockholders. So that's the old school way. That's ensuring that you're focused on the customer, you're focused on your organization, and you're paying attention to the stockholders. That's a great mission statement right there. And as they were growing up, as they were driving towards that $1 billion business, and they did, and they hit it They're a multi-billion dollar business now. They compete with Granger. You probably have heard of Granger. Um, as they were doing that, when they would fall into tough times, they would stop hiring. Makes sense. They would do things like not buy new desks and really ask people to make do with what they have. They would ask people not to have overtime. There was a period of time where they were, they were in a financial way that they asked everyone from the director level and above to take voluntary unpaid time off. So they did all those things so they wouldn't have to lay people off. So that when things turned around, they were ready with a trained workforce that was motivated because this company just protected their job. That was a motivated workforce that was ready to launch and spring them ahead. And it worked. They became a multi-billion dollar company. So you're probably waiting for the but. Here it is. They became a multi-billion dollar company. Great job. A model. Wall Street loved them. I think the Motley Fool was always saying buy, buy, buy. Well, change in senior management. Third generation owner, Harvard grad, and then change kind of on the executive team. Layoffs became a way of doing business. Now, it's not that they're floundering, but they're missing their quarterly earnings expectations. And Wall Street has turned from buy, buy, buy to sell. So that's where they are. I think that's a cautionary tale. I think they can turn it around real quick, but they're following down the bad path like everybody else with the layoffs right now. So what's next? I really don't know. You tell me. Um, but I think layoffs trend is going to remain unless something happens. I mean, maybe stockholders, and I own stock, I'm sure you do too. Maybe somehow you can demand the long-term growth and stability instead of these short-term gains. I don't know. I think most stock brokers are going for those short-term gains. And honestly, a lot of people I speak to who have stock look at the short-term gains. They don't look at the long-term growth. Um, you know, I I had Amazon early and it really paid off because of their long-term growth. Um, and just sticking with this mentality is so bad in many ways. It's a destabilizing model. It's bad for the U.S. job market. What's going to happen is it's going to drive more companies out of the United States. It's going to impact education, and innovation happens in the US. Not that it doesn't happen anywhere else, but it happens here. I think we're going to see IBM decline into nothingness. It's going to impact growth. And in terms of stability within the US, I actually think layoffs and H-1B and visas that are like that are a national security issue. So you tell me, do me a favor if you could, leave a comment. Let me know what you think is going to happen next. Thanks for listening.